They have probably existed for a long time. The Aborigines in Australia were familiar with them. According to 16th century records, they also appeared in Europe, where legend had it they were supposed to be mown by the devil. Nobody could imagine how they were made. So were they really the devil's work? Whether circles or similar patterns really appeared in those times is unknown at this day. Legends also suggest that they sporadically appeared in mid-20th century Irish crop fields. This was whispered among poor and simple country folk who liked to believe the old myths of their forefathers of the return of the legendary giant, Finn McCool, and took the patterns to be his footprints. So it went until the mid-60s when they appeared again in Queensland, Australia. The mysterious signs in the corn. In the mid-70s, single circles begin to appear in southern England. A leap into the consciousness of the modern world. A good hour by car away from London, one of the most important capitals, communications, and business centers of our time, together with New York, Tokyo, and Singapore. Here they appear, the almost indescribable shapes in the cornfields. Indescribable because mankind, during the long history of civilization to date, has created a variety of thousands of symbols and signs for a multitude of purposes. But the geometry of the formations is hardly comparable with existing patterns. Sure, there are circles, there are geometrically ordered lines, but their symbolism can only be guessed at. In the meantime, they have appeared in almost every country in the world, but especially frequently in the south of England, where the phenomenon has become increasingly concentrated on the county of Wiltshire. Here, the circles and lines manifest themselves year by year in such variety, in such complexity, as nowhere else on Earth. People from all over the world have begun to make pilgrimages to these locations in the vicinity of Holy Glastonbury, Stonehenge, and Avebury, to a land abundant with the cultural heritage of ancient times. A land of a million mysteries. In September of 1991, two mischievous pensioners dented the illusion that these were the signs from the gods many people longed for in cold, depressing times. Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley claimed that they were responsible for all the crop patterns. But hundreds of formations within 3 months, while the corn rises and grows? This could not be the only truth. They couldn't have done this all alone, and as they made their claims, they didn't even know about the other formations which appeared. It's quite sure that there were many imitators. Were they really inspired by Doug and Dave? Was the making of crop circles really to become a new subcultural tradition, like many other prankish customs never recorded in history books, like stealing May birches from neighboring villages? But why then do these signs appear in similar forms all over the world? Could this really be an international conspiracy of bored students learning how to construct crop circles through the internet? What a bizarre and complex effort this would be, ignored by the press for years. After 1990 and 1991, when crop circles were brought to the attention of the global public, the press seemed to lose interest and the reports were silenced. They were not mentioned again for years afterwards. But the phenomenon continued to exist and remained unexplained. Sure enough, something strange is happening out there in the fields. Observations and descriptions from around the world seem to be alike as peas in a pod. There seems to be no lack of creative speculation on what this is all about. Certainly, throughout history, the Englishman has become well known for his farcical and fabulous stories. Yet there is a phenomenon here. It is real. You can touch it. You can get into the eye of the circle. In the center of the circle, we find the characteristic swirl around which the crop has been flattened, sometimes clockwise, sometimes counterclockwise. The stalks are clearly not cut, as some may still believe. They are bent but not broken, and often lie bundled together in several layers and lines. In 1991, about 250 simple circles appeared, along with large formations such as those already seen in 1990, some as much as 240 meters across, in fantastic designs. Fewer appeared during the following years. The distinctions between an apparently authentic formation and a faked one are difficult to discern. It is important to be one of the first people to enter a fresh formation to examine the differences. But nobody knows in advance where the next pattern will appear, and even then, the likely differences may be insignificant. Nevertheless, up to 3 days after the appearance of the formations, amateur and professional cameramen can experience the effects of residual electromagnetic fields which cause their batteries, which normally last 1.5 hours, to discharge within 10 minutes, as if the life were being sucked out of them. Our own camera crew can confirm this effect. Scientists from many different disciplines came from all over the world to southern England, trying to solve the puzzle by approaching it from all angles. Meanwhile, many specialist magazines are dealing with the subject. One of the best informed experts on the crop circle phenomenon is George Wingfield, editor of the longest-running magazine on the subject, The Cereologist.
I first became involved in the crop circles in August of 1987, and I read a small item in the newspaper about some crop circles which had appeared near Westbury, Wiltshire, and I went with my wife and my 2 young sons to see what this was all about. And I remember this very well. At the time I thought this will be something very simple. I'm sure we'll see what the explanation is straight away. I was thinking entirely in scientific terms. But we found these crop circles. We found a number of crop circles that day, and it soon became apparent that this was not something easily explained or obvious. All sorts of thoughts did occur to one, that it could have been possibly caused by some atmospheric vortex or something of this kind, or possibly man-made. It just didn't seem that way. Later that day we went into a third circle. This was a very large formation with 2 concentric rings around it. And Gloria, my wife Gloria, sat with the dogs. We had 3 dogs at that time. Sat on a hillside looking down at us in the circle. And she saw blue flashing lights which appeared to flash across the ground just for about 2 or 3 minutes. And she said she just didn't know what this was. It was something very weird. But she had a very strong sensation that there was something there, something unseen, something invisible, which was causing whatever this effect was. And suddenly we didn't get the impression that these circles had been made by people or by any natural phenomenon. And that was just the beginning of it.
How did you survive the Doug and Dave revelation?
Well, undoubtedly, as far as the public's perception of this phenomenon was concerned, a very big dent. As far as the general public is concerned, those researchers who had the data base to look at, the data to peruse, clearly from the very beginning were not at all convinced that these gentlemen were responsible when you only had to look at the results of their handiwork and listen to the questions and answers that they were giving to know that indeed there was never a real starting chance that they had ever perpetrated this particular phenomenon. It is unfortunate that the media worldwide were so well organized into position to release that throughout the world on just about every radio and television network throughout the world in less than 12 hours. Undoubtedly, that hoax claim was a hoax itself, and the phenomenon occurring around the world right now, something coming in the region of 5 or 6 per day of genuine formations, will of course confirm in itself that the phenomenon goes on.
Standing in the background, and his eyepiece.
Like Doug Bauer, some of the hoaxers went public, claiming that they could easily create these formations at night in almost no time, as Doug and Dave claimed to have done, using a simple rope, stake, or roller. To see if they could do this, world-renowned biologist Professor Rupert Sheldrake of Cambridge University worked with a German magazine to launch a competition under the authentic conditions in which crop circles appear, at night, with no artificial light.
Rubbish!
I wouldn't, well, I mean, the evidence is that crop circles occur. I mean, they're real phenomena, but the question is what makes them. And the possibility that human beings make them was always obviously there, and it's not that difficult to flatten crops. The purpose of our competition was to find out if the various features of crop circles that people claimed could not be hoaxed could in fact be hoaxed, which is why we created a set design for the contest, which included supposedly hard-to-hoax features, and we wanted to see whether or not people could do them. The contest showed that, in fact, practically all these features could be hoaxed relatively easily. I was amazed at the incredibly high standard of the crop formations in the contest.
Looking closely, anyone can see that the edges are not as sharp as in the real formations. Stalks are broken instead of bent, and the swirl does not seem to be as perfect.
I accept that large numbers are made by human beings, certainly in the last few years. And what has happened is that from the time that the public became aware of crop circles, which was probably in 1989, 1990, when a lot appeared in the newspapers and on television, so many people have become involved that inevitably there have been a large number of people who've faked circles, and they've faked extremely complex designs in the fields. Many of which are extremely well made these days, very geometrical and carefully prepared. But nevertheless, I have no doubt at all there is a genuine basic phenomenon which is probably still occurring. And you must remember that this occurs in many different countries throughout the world.
Andy Thomas is the author of the book Fields of Mystery and editor of the Sussex Circular magazine. Despite the magazine's regional-sounding title, Thomas tries to cover the appearance of crop circles around the world. The publication offers readers monthly updates on crop circle research. His team works in close partnership with Dr. Levengood, a biophysicist and former professor of Michigan State University in the USA.
It's strange. Every country seems to have its own flavour in the type of design that is appearing. The German formations, for instance, tend to have a slightly Gothic quality about them. The American formations, of which there are many, tend to have a more spindly, sort of almost Native American art about them. And I think that's the circle-making forces, whatever they are, sort of giving symbols to specific places that will mean something in that particular area. So, yes, obviously, like circles and rings, there's a certain basic component of crop circles which keeps popping up again and again, but they seem to vary from country to country, and it's almost as if each country gets something which means something within its own frame of reference.
In the years when large crop formations first appeared, major surveillance and research projects were established to detect the circle makers, whoever they might be. As early as 1989, the first project of this kind, Operation White Crow, tried to solve the puzzle using infrared cameras. it succeeded in recording strange noises which remain unexplained to this day. This was followed in 1990 by Operation Blackbird, coordinated together with the British Army, the BBC, and NTV. Others followed, such as Operation Blue Hill, while Operation Argus concentrated on a detailed analysis of the possible influence of radioactivity and electromagnetism. The investigations were carried out by the American section of the CCCS in cooperation with scientists from the universities of Las Vegas, Nevada, and Canadian physicists. The work was coordinated by the British CCCS.
Very hefty scientific group, something like 20 scientists, nuclear physicists amongst them, are looking for those half-life isotopes, 4 or 5, very unusual isotopes which are not found or not created by nature itself. Last year they were discovered to have half-lives varying from something like 13 hours to 38 days, discovered only inside the crop circles. I understand that results in the last few days yet again confirm that these short half-life isotopes are present, and that for the first time, as far as this research is concerned, will confirm this phenomenon is not one of nature.
You know that there are many theories. They range all the way from the belief that some people have that nature spirits are at work, right the way through to the belief that extraterrestrials are visiting us. At the moment, my own judgment is suspended. The point about Operation Argus is to collect hard scientific facts, what is actually happening, and only when we have done that will I be prepared to speculate further about what may be using those forces and why. The only thing I will add is that something intelligent is at work, and I am perfectly clear that it is not human intelligence.
Well, one of the things that we do in Sussex is we work very closely with the BLT research team, which is the team in America led by Dr. Levengood. And what we do is collect lots of samples of crop that's actually been laid down inside crop circles. And we box them up, we dry them out, and we send them to Dr. Levengood in the States, and he examines them. And Dr. Levengood has discovered that looking at these samples under a microscope, there are biological changes occurring which can't be reproduced simply by just stomping the crop down. So looking at it with a microscope, he's found that the nodal joints are very elongated, that you get on a plant, get a little node. They're very swollen and elongated, and they appear to have been burst open from the inside, as if there's been some sort of superheating that's gone on in perhaps a matter of microseconds. And with this work, we work very closely with them. We send them lots and lots of samples, and Dr. Levengood believes that he is able to therefore tell the difference between a genuine formation and one which may be made by other things like people or the weather.
It's a very important development that Professor Levengood has discovered, and that is that there is a change in the genetic structure of the plants themselves. He's found that whereas one would expect just a single embryo from the heads of these plants, there are multiple embryos, and that is well beyond. It's a very rare condition. It's embryoliotic condition. It's extremely rare, and it exists only in the crop circle samples sent to him directly from myself in Australia, from Chad Deacon up there in Canada, and indeed from sites in America there also.
According to the analysis of Professor Gerald Hawkins, as well as Kenneth Spellman of the Signalis Laboratories in Rodborough, the fact that the enlarged knots of the affected stalks are genetically altered could be the result of brief exposure to intense radiated heat, according to Dr. Levengood. This correlates with the research of British aerospace engineer Thomas Roy Dutton, who bases his own theory on general relativity.
I concluded it could not be by human technology. We just didn't have the kind of technology which was required. And it seemed to me that we would require something like gravitational radiation to explain why the crop was not burnt.
What is gravitational radiation?
Well, not very much is known about it yet, but in fact, gravitational radiation is really a series of waves in space-time. And the space-time is compressed, alternately compressed and expanded. in a series of waves, and this effectively causes matter to vibrate. It would cause matter to vibrate in passing through a solid object. So the in the case of the crop circles, I believe the crop stems would probably have to be tuned to the frequency. Gravitational radiation is predicted by relativity to be caused when a large cosmic event occurs. However, it can occur in other ways. And Palazzi in Italy, a physicist at the University of Rome, has written a paper in which he is suggesting that microwave gravitational radiation of the kind which I am talking about could be produced in the laboratory using a synchrotron, the particle accelerator.
The results from independent researchers are not contradictory, but instead seem to overlap and reinforce each other. Thus, the extraterrestrial elements of the phenomenon remain in mind. This corresponds with the earliest suspicions that the apparent causes of crop circles seem to be well beyond the capabilities of today's human technology. But among crop circle enthusiasts are also people who simply accept the beauty of the formations and their impact on people. Patricia Murray from Santa Monica, California, travels to southern England every year out of devotion to the circles.
Many people talk about the crop circles as being the greatest mystery of our time, which, of course, it is. It also seems to be a great love story, because in many ways it's about falling in love with the unknown, falling in love with our imagination and the earth and nature. When you walk into a crop circle, it seems as though you're in a slice of an environment between worlds. It came from somewhere else. We don't know where they came from or what is making them. And it doesn't seem to be really of this world, even though it is in our fields. And somehow it's not quite of the world that made them. So you were in a slice, a suspended place between two worlds.
Michael Glickman, engineer, architect, and designer, as well as the author of the Little Crop Circle primer, Corn Circles, gives lectures in the U.S., and together with Patricia Murray, is working on a new book about their common passion.
I mean, let us understand that science or scientism is the most powerful religious orthodoxy on the planet at the moment, and most scientists will be very quickly rejected if they engage a phenomenon which in the broadest terms at the moment is dealing with the paranormal or the supernatural. The problem is that at the end of the century we tend only to be interested in mechanism, and here is a phenomenon which is above all artistic. It's placing shapes, forms, which embody the most meticulous geometries and symbolism, which are still misunderstood. And the furthest the scientists go to approaching this is to find out what makes a piece of wheat fall down. Now, first of all, they haven't done it yet, but I have to say, without wishing in any way to put down their efforts, who cares what makes a piece of wheat fall down? What's much more interesting is what makes 10,000 stalks of wheat precisely obey individual instructions as how to form a meticulous work of art. And science hasn't started to approach that yet. I despair of its ability to approach an understanding of the crop circles. The first is that this landscape has been richly populated by humans for millennia, and it's very difficult to go a quarter of a mile without finding stones or burial mounds or carvings or white horses on the hillside. It's a very rich tapestry of historical human activity. And of course, all this without mentioning the energy lines, the ley lines, which cross this area very richly. So this is number one. Number two, if you are choosing for your medium crop field, then one could say, why don't they go and put them down in the prairie landscapes of Saskatchewan? Well, of course, there are two reasons. The first is that if it was just plonked in the middle of a gigantic flat prairie, nobody would see it. And what we have here is not quite hill farming, but small-scale farming on a very richly moulded landscape. Very often the crop formations are on hillsides, which can be seen from the flat ground. Very often they're on flat ground, which can be seen from hillsides, so that there's the possibility of great theatrical display in this landscape.
The phenomenon seemed to reach a climax in the summer of 1996, when sometime around the 7th of July, this pictogram appeared in a wheat field close to Stonehenge. It consisted of 149 individual circles. This formation is not only one of the most beautiful designs ever drawn in the cornfields, there are also many clear indications that it was made during daytime.
The control tower told me that through their PR officer, public relations officer, that they monitored an aircraft into Thruxton that made mention of that design late in the afternoon of the 7th of July. Well, I, through Busty Taylor in England, have traced the pilot, another pilot, a civilian pilot with a doctor as his passenger, who flew over Stonehenge at 5:30 p.m. that afternoon, and they are positive that this design, this enormous, huge design, 912 feet down its spiraled spine, was not there at 5:30. Couldn't have missed it. Could not have missed it. 6:15, the light aircraft pilot has landed at Thruxton, and the doctor has got out, he's got into his vehicle, and is driving down the A303, and vehicles are already stopping. They're already looking at this enormous array of circles in the field.
On Sunday mornings, especially in the summer, my husband likes to go around the farm because living near Stonehenge, we do have certain problems with holiday makers camping in the fields, and at this time of the year, that isn't such a good idea. So on the Sunday morning of the 7th of July, my husband went all around the farm as usual, and nothing untoward came to light, so he came home again, and that was the end of the 7th of July as we know it. Later on, a pilot flew over the farm at about 5:30, and on his return from the southwest at about 6:10, he claims that these crop circles had formed.
According to the pilot's own statement, he overflew the field next to Stonehenge a second time on his return, 30 minutes after his first pass, and discovered the formation which had not been there on his outward flight. Unfortunately, he was unavailable for a personal interview in front of the camera, since the local press had reported some of his statements out of context and inconsistently. We were able to locate him and speak to him on the phone. Even so, we were met with a wall of silence. The guards at Stonehenge, who watched the fences and fields around the monument, had been specially instructed by their supervisors not to give any statements. Off the record, however, we heard that the guards who were on duty that day did not notice any activity in the field, which is easily seen from their position. creating a man-made formation like this by daylight would require hours of concentrated labor.
And standing in the field, in the crop circles, you can see every vehicle on that road, and within 200 yards, I think it's less than that, about 150 yards from that road. So there was nothing going to move in that field during that day that wasn't seen by the road users. And then behind them, we have the security guards securing the stones at Stonehenge. 24 hours a day, and even at night they have infrared equipment. They saw nothing.
What's particularly interesting about this is that the Stonehenge formation was one of the more complex formations we've ever had, and certainly subsequently was the most visited and most photographed formation we've ever had. And that it was permitted to form during daylight hours is a significant shift for the circle makers. I think they're pushing us even harder and harder and harder to recognize what's going on here.
Some 3,000 years before Christ, men of various cultures began to carve strange, abstract signs in the rock walls of their homes, instead of the stylized, naturalistic rock paintings they had produced until then. These signs remain a puzzle to this day. As in the cornfields, in thousands of locations around the world, we find the circle as an ancient fundamental symbol apparently inalienable from human history. We also find these symbols, the main elements in the crop formations, in ancient Celtic culture, or at English burial sites right on our doorstep, or here in the spirals of the Irish burial site at New Grange. Did these spirals and circles once represent the labyrinth path into the realms of the dead? Do they show that life is a long and arduous path with a beginning and an end, and repeated confrontations with unavoidable fate? Are they memorials or signs which we rediscover in today's circle symbols? Do they evolve according to the level of our own conscious evolution?
Now, in particular, their reliance on the golden proportion is most remarkable. The golden proportion was classically a system of dividing architectural facades or the layout of paintings. It's a very precise and beautiful formation which contains itself and is contained by itself and is an endless system of proportioning. And of course what's interesting about it is the golden proportion is something also that God uses when he designs a flower or a tree. It recurs through all living creatures. The golden proportion, which is 1 to 1.618, is a feature of the pentagram geometry, the five-pointed star, which is often a constraint of crop circles, though rarely made explicit in crop circles. It's also a function of the Fibonacci number series, which is often made explicit in the number count of elements of crop circles. So these guys, whoever they are, know the rules absolutely inside out and know how to play these games. The Fibonacci series is a sequence of numbers within which the last number is always added to the number beforehand. When you go back and divide the smaller number by the one which immediately follows it, the result always tends, once again, to the golden section. The result tends closer and closer to 1.618. And by the time these numbers have got bigger, that is in the 55, 89, 144 area, the resultant of that division of the smaller into the larger is more and more exactly the 1.618 of the golden section, so that essentially Fibonacci can be seen as a method of deriving the golden section exactly, but it also has other functions in number games which the circle makers play. Examples of this, the 5 is a very particular favourite, and even though the pentagram, the 5-pointed star, is a rare event, it's occurred, the star has only been made explicit once, the idea of fiveness, for example, the quintuplet form, which is like a 5 spot on a dice, is very, very commonplace. As far as Fibonacci numbers are concerned, the huge Alton-Barnes spiral formation this year had 89 circles. The Windmill Hill formation this year had 34 main circles in its 3 legs, and to achieve that it had 3 legs which had 11 circles, 11 circles and 12 circles to make 34, not 11, 11, 11 as an ordinary designer would do it, but the construction was pushed to encompass a magic Fibonacci number of 34.
Would it really be possible to create such complex patterns by hand in one night, let alone within a few minutes, unseen in broad daylight? It should be remembered that many of the huge formations lie far apart in the middle of hilly fields, yet look completely symmetrical when seen undistorted from the air. How could human constructors take even this simple condition into account in their work? However, over the years, there has been an increased number of reports of unidentified luminous phenomena in connection with the appearance of crop formations. In some cases, these phenomena seem to materialize or are in fact substantial. Project CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence under the direction of Dr. Stephen Greer from the United States, was established to try to contact possible extraterrestrial intelligence at locations of increasing reports of unidentified flying objects. This group comprises about 50 members from around the world who waited and meditated for many summer nights in southern England, sending music and light signals into the night sky, and to help to get closer to the key of this obviously complex puzzle. In fact, the results of their efforts were reports of both unidentified, non-materialized, as well as materialized objects. And at this point, it is worth noting that UFO means nothing other than unidentified flying object of whatever nature. By intensive surveillance of the sky during this project, it nevertheless became possible to confirm many reports from many witnesses of high-quality sightings.
We were in the Towsmead field with a group doing the CE5 initiative protocols until a rainstorm came up. We were actually in the circle, which is beside the ring.
Sure.
And suddenly, earlier, I should say, before we get too far down the road, is that right after sunset, we saw 4 UFOs in the east that hovered above the horizon and stayed for 10 to 15 minutes each consecutively. At one time, there were 2 present there. These were distant, I would say, in excess of 2 miles. Beyond that, I can't judge. The other interesting thing that happened, if Sandra, you need to stand here while I'm recounting this so we can fill in, was that there were a number of lights that seemed to be illuminating from above the clouds. We could not find any source on the ground. One was like a cartwheel that was shining above the clouds down onto the cloud bank.
Sure.
This phenomenon lasted for quite a few minutes, at least 10, I would say, that we were seeing these lights above the cloud.
Yeah, they kind of come and go.
And they would come and go during that period. Then it got very dark suddenly. A black cloud enveloped the entire area, and we were a sudden rainstorm hit us. It sprinkled first, and then it came down very hard.
Sure. But I think that the part about the fact that the edge of the circle began to shimmer was critical, and that there was a mass that was larger at the bottom and more pointed at the top that moved within that shimmering area. It just seemed to arbitrarily move without seeming to interact with it. I don't know if
it was like looking through an energy field that was on the edge, and that we all saw towards it would be the north edge of the circle where we were sitting. What this is, nobody knows, but we did all see it. There were multiple other things that we're seeing that were more minor while we were in the circle. Now, interestingly, with the rain, everybody was washed off of the tops of the hills and were sent home. I got the very strong, intuitive sense that we should come out onto this concrete road and sit in the rain.
Sure.
And so we came and we parked here. Everyone had left except the four of us: Sandra Small, myself, Chris Mansell, and Anika, whose last name I have written but I cannot recall.
Arrived at Woodbury Hill and it had started to rain. So that's the original watch was abandoned, and Steve and Steve and Sandra Small and Anika and I ended up being the only ones left on the road just south of Woodbury Hill. And then at approximately about 12:15 to 12:30, I noticed this row of lights.
And we were sitting in the car, and he looked out of his window and he said, "What is that?" And he went out of the car, knocked on Steve Greer's window.
And Chris and his friend Anika were in the car just behind us. Suddenly, about 12:20 to 12:25 a.m. on the 27th, this would be now, just after midnight, and he started banging on the driver's side door. And I thought he was going to break the glass, really. He was so excited. And I rolled down the window, and he said, look, there's a spaceship coming through. So Chris sighted it first.
I got out of the car, I told Steve about it, and then we realized it was a sort of unnatural formation, that it wasn't being made by an aircraft or a helicopter or a car or anything that could be immediately explainable. So we decided that it was something which we needed to observe more closely. And we proceeded to do that. We had binoculars, and we made an audio tape of the event. Basically what it was a row of lights which appeared to be revolving around a structure. The lights were revolving from left to right, starting with a sort of a red color and ending up with a sort of a blue color. One of the lights at the top of the formation detached itself from this structure and appeared to go away from the main formation and then make a maneuver and come back and rejoin it. And then some of the lights from the bottom row of lights actually detached themselves from the formation and went to left and right of the formation to some quite considerable distance, and then came back and rejoined it. And then we decided that Steve said, well, there's something going on here. He said, I'm going to try and make some kind of contact. And so he got one of these very powerful handheld searchlights from the car and started flashing at it, and he flashed 2 times, and it flashed 2 times, and then we were all very excited by that, and then he flashed again, and this went on for some considerable time, this exchange of flashes. I think what one's intelligence tells one is that a system of a light structure like that, a system light structure which was obviously appeared to be revolving around something, couldn't actually be held together by anything else but some kind of structure. There's no, it couldn't possibly really. Well, let's say, I mean, who's to say what's possible and what's not possible? But let's say that one's logic, one's mental logic, actually, tells you that the thing is not just it's not just a random series of lights going around in a circle, and plus the fact that when the object was quite a low was a sort of just at a small height from the ground, when it was actually moving across, we were pretty sure we saw against the trees what we thought was the outline of a sort of quite a distinctive shape, really.
And for me, the exciting thing was, because we've been so many nights in the circles and watched the sky, I really learned the difference between, you know, helicopters, satellites, falling stars, you name it. And this was something I'd never seen, so in that sense, for me, it's an unidentified flying object.
I mean, what we have to remember about the hoax thing is that it was an accident that we were at that particular point. We weren't supposed to be there. We were supposed to be on the other side of the hill. Now, if somebody was going to orchestrate a hoax which was designed specifically to fool Stephen Greer's party, they would have orchestrated that hoax on the other side of the hill where it could be seen. Nobody knew that we were going to be in that place, and therefore there was no way that anybody could have known that we were there, because it was completely accidental.
Yeah, well, I've never been into UFOs or anything. So later on, I've looked in books and everything, and it's definitely the typical one, which is very funny, like the cartoons. You know?
What makes you sure it was not a hoax?
It's just, for me, it was the kind of the intensity of the lights and how they were rotating, and the speed of the aircraft and the straight line through the sky, and how it suddenly changed the lights. I mean, there are all kind of things that are so specific.
Nick Pope was an official UFO investigator in the British Ministry of Defence between 1991 and 1995 as a Secretary of Air Staff, Section 2A.
I had several hundred reports come to me each year. Of those, 9 out of 10 had conventional explanations. It became my view that the most logical conclusion was that some of these were extraterrestrial in origin. Yes, of course, I would brief it up the chain and try and convince my bosses that there was something going on. But I have to say that the reaction that I got was rather skeptical, and my bosses, I believe, were generally speaking, fairly closed-minded in their attitude. It was always an uphill struggle for me, even when I believed I had clear evidence of something very strange going on.
Have you done any investigation into the crop circles, and if you have, what sort of conclusions have you come to?
Well, when I was investigating and researching UFOs at the Ministry of Defence, by default, as it were, all sorts of other weird and wonderful things came my way. Some reports of animal mutilations, and of course crop circles as well. There was very little I could do, but I've had a little bit of a look at this, both officially and now in a private capacity. I'm convinced that although most of them are probably hoaxes, I mean, there is a lot of hoaxing that goes on, obviously. There are some that seem to me so symmetrical and so intricate that, again, there may be an unconventional explanation involved, possibly some sort of extraterrestrial connection here.
Because this will make a picture. You've got the helicopter and the circle behind them. He's bristling with equipment. Right, if we get this here, we can get a picture of him in front of that. Oh, yeah.
That the military really shows a lively interest in the corn circles was demonstrated all too clearly to Colin Andrews and his colleagues in the summer of 1994, when they discovered a military helicopter over Alton Barnes in a field where the most interesting large formations appear every year. It is the same field which was placed under close observation with infrared cameras in 1991, and the formation still appeared despite this. The interest of the crew of this hectically maneuvering helicopter was directed at an object similar to the disc already filmed by Steve Alexander at the same site in 1990. After the appearance of the helicopter, the disc-like object disappeared rapidly towards a neighboring field where the glittering of its surface in the background betrays its new position. The helicopter crew seems irritated, apparently having lost sight of the object.
What's that? There's something flashing on the ground.
Under it?
No, under the tail.
Oh, yeah.
see it?
Under the tail? That's their normal light, isn't it?
No, it's on the ground.
It's on the ground under the tail. Like
There's some flashing thing on the ground.
Certainly a lot of very interesting photographic footage has been taken in the crop circle areas and near the crop circles over the years, and many things have been certainly seen which have not been recorded on film. But in Steve Alexander's film, taken in 1990, you see what appears to be a small disc, maybe just a few inches in diameter, which moves over the fields. It moves at fairly low level and goes down into the crop and comes out of the crop and eventually flies off over a tractor which a man is driving. And this man looks up and sees this disc. That has never been explained.
And then I had a man come around and see me and show me this video. And it was just like the same thing I saw, but he asked me what I saw before he explained what was on the video. And I told him exactly the same what was on the video. So, you know, but I didn't. The strange bit about it is because when you're rolling, you come up the field and you just sort of carry on. You go out, turn around and come back. And for some reason, like I come out the top of the field and as soon as this thing appeared, the tractor stopped. As soon as it left, I carried on moving.
There are very few cases of where anyone has positively said, I've seen a disc in the sky which has made a crop circle. There are certain cases where people have seen luminous objects and objects which looked like discs above a field. Later they've discovered a crop circle.
We are in the control tower at the airport of the world's largest city, Mexico City. We have turned our lighting off at the request of the air traffic controllers. For some time now, unidentified flying objects have been appearing on radar screens here, sometimes for hours at a time, alongside normal air traffic. At the same time, in the periphery of Mexico City, in the Toluca and Metepec regions, which are also covered by these radars, corn circles have increasingly been appearing, corresponding with ground sightings by eyewitnesses. On this occasion, we were in luck.
There is. Right there. Right there.
Oh yeah, yep. Yep.
Two at the same time. Two at the same time. You want to see it?
Yep.
Oops.
Right.
There.
Right. Yep.
One has disappeared.
And I filmed it. Perfect.
The other is going to disappear.
And this is again in the Toluca area.
Yep. Yes, it's very close. But it disappeared.
Disappeared too, yeah.
But remember, Toluca is here.
Right. So it is northwest of Toluca.
Northwest, yes.
Como ahí en Metepec es un pueblo, la gente no le llama, o sea, no, como los ven seguido, no les prestan atención a esas.
And Metepec is a small town, so many people sees them a lot, and so they don't pay too much attention of these objects.
Y al entrar, es una privada donde yo vivo, al entrar voy viendo que ya la nave estaba junto a mi casa.
So I drove and I got into the place where I used to live. It was a private place where there's many houses. And when I noticed that the object was on top of my house.
Estaba al otro lado de una barda y era un terreno
It was a
de
little
maíz.
bit behind of my house, which was a cornfield.
Entonces lo que hice fue cuando fui por la cámara para grabarlo, sí prendía la cámara, pero al levantar el lente se apagaba.
So I went into the house and got my camera, but whenever I pointed the camera up to tape the object, the camera's energy went off.
Entonces, en eso llega dos luces del lado derecho y una del lado izquierdo.
And then two lights came from the right side and one from the left.
Muy grandes también.
Very big also.
En forma de rombo. De diamante.
Like a diamond.
Eran rojas.
They were very red.
Y primero se quedaron estáticas.
They were static at first.
Y luego cada una de las chiquitas empezó a hacer movimientos muy rápidos.
And then each one of them began to make very fast movements.
Y a la hora que los hacía, pues lo hacía tan rápido que ya nada más se veía que se empellaba.
It was so fast that it seemed that it only blinked, but they were moving.
Y luego como que se los absorbía, como que se metían a
And then like they were absorbed into the big ship and they came out. Que no se entraban y salían.
Primero se metieron.
And then they got in, they were absorbed by the ship and they didn't come out again.
Entonces, ya cuando estuve en la ventana, estaba yo viendo también la nave y me dice mi hijo, me jala y me dice, ¿qué es lo que está ahí en el terreno?
And so when she looked up to the sky to see the object, the little kid said, Mama, look down, what is down in the cornfield?
Entonces, había cerca de, no las conté porque todo fue rapidísimo, pero eran como 7 naves, como de este tamaño.
There were 7 ships about this size.
Chiquitas como
small. It was like this drawing. They were like this drawing.
Roja como los
They were red,
faros de las patrullas.
like the patrol lights.
Y estaban volando al ras de donde termina el maíz.
And they were flying just above the corn plants.
Se veía todo iluminado.
But it was, everything was illuminated por los ojitos.
Por los ojitos.
Everything was illuminated by the small balls.
Íbamos entrando y llegamos a un círculo.
And then we got to a circle.
Al primer círculo. En ese círculo lo que pasó fue que nos impresionó porque estaban todas las cañas dobladas.
All the plants were bent down. One thing like an F and some zigzag formations.
Y así. Mira.
Knife al revés.
Sì, perché lo video grave.
One day after the appearance of the corn circle, the witness once again saw a luminous phenomena at the same place, which disappeared again immediately afterwards. However, this time, her camera worked.
Entonces, volteo, es el video, le digo a Erika, oye, ¿qué es eso?
So I said to my sister, what is that?
Y ella no veía nada. Yo lo veía porque yo tenía todo el lente metido.
She didn't see anything by her own eyes because I saw it because I had the zoom in.
Es blanco, 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 blanco como esto, de blanco.
Completely white.
Blanco.
Pero de luz luminescente.
Sí, como que le salía luz de adentro hacia afuera.
It's completely white, like if light came
Pero
out.
se veía perfectamente bien toda su silueta,
But you could
todo,
see the
todo,
whole silhouette,
sus rasgos.
everything, and the features.
Y traía un traje gris,
and it had a gray suit,
parecido a la piel de elefante, así medio
very much
arrugado,
like,
pegado pero arrugado.
It was very tight to the body, but wrinkled.
Pero arrugado. Entonces vuelve a voltearse de perfil.
And he turned profile again.
Y en eso, yo digo que era un animal y es que no le veía forma de humano, no es.
It wasn't a human. I tried to find a shape or an explanation.
Y cuando voltea de perfil veo, ahora sí ya le veo y tiene esto muy grande.
But then I see the back part of the head and it's big.
Entonces, en eso voltea directamente a donde yo estoy con la cámara.
But then he turns around exactly where I was taping it.
Y le veo veo sus ojotes aquí.
And I see his
casi me da un infarto.
near me and I almost had a heart attack.
Sí, casi me da un infarto porque ahí ya me impresionó mucho que me estaba viendo a través del lente, ¿no?
I could see him looking at me.
Y en eso se agacha
and then he turns down again,
y desaparece.
And it disappears.
No se mueve, no se va, o sea, desaparece.
It doesn't walk away, it just disappears.
Y la cámara se apaga.
And the camera turns off.
De perfil. Pero no quedó muy bien, o sea, no es.
It's more or less
está como caricatura.
Then we proceed to go to the area. We talked to many witnesses, and all these witnesses told us that they saw this huge UFO, especially on the night of September 15th. They saw many little things coming out from the big object, and then we found somehow a crop circle or a UFO nest, if you will, in the area exactly where this extraterrestrial was recorded. And then we wanted to check this out with the people in the radar. And then we went to the tower of control in the airport in Mexico, and we found that they were testing a new equipment that night on September 15th, with digital equipment. And they had this large craft that was suspended on the air for 5 hours over Metepec. And then in the radar, they had 6 sightings over the next 10 days. And we went in a helicopter to each of these places, and we found, let's say, crop circles or UFO nests in every place that they had detected in the radar. That is why, and because we also found a plant, a pumpkin plant, completely degenerated without explanation. I mean, the degeneration was so intense that every leaf was different in the plant, and there was no possibility of an explanation, scientific explanation. For that reason, with all these elements, physical, radar, witnesses, and because we have seen the image more than 1,000 times, and we haven't found a single clue to consider this a hoax, we consider this a complete case, a case that could prove that something very strange happened on Metepec in the nights of September 15th and 16th, and that this housewife was able to record a real extraterrestrial. For us, there is not a doubt in our minds about this very strange figure. We believe we have in video a real extraterrestrial.
Rome, the 8th of May, 1994. Amateur cameramen succeeded in filming this glowing object over the Ostia district. The object is spurting out smaller disc-like flying objects, one after another. Objects like these smaller discs are often seen in cornfields. At dawn on the 11th of August 1996, an amateur filmmaker who prefers to remain anonymous lay in wait at the Iron Age hill fort of Oliver's Castle near Devizes, hoping to catch the corn circle makers at work. He apparently succeeded in taking this footage. If genuine, it is really sensational.
To be in the right place at the right time. When we talked at the United Nations recently, back, 3 years ago, Mohammed Ramadan there, down at the CSETI group at the UN, asked if I would reinvestigate, if I would be prepared to reinvestigate, re-interview these 70-odd witnesses around the world who claim to have seen them form. I did get as far as I could into that list. I interviewed and re-interviewed a number of them. And the one thing they've only ever agreed on, they disagree on a number of things, of course, and that might be the truth of the matter, that it involves many, many aspects of which some people see, some people don't. On some occasions that it physically is different than other occasions, but they all agreed on one fact, that what they witnessed, most credible people that I've spoken to personally, that these circles form very fast. They've all said between 10, 15 seconds has been an estimate. And this guy said very fast. He hadn't counted the seconds. Well, now we've got it on film. And it's 7 seconds from the very moment the spheres appear to the very moment it's all over. The actual major construction phase is about 3 seconds.
It is likely that the film was generated by computer. The discolorations visible at the top edge of the film when it is viewed frame by frame could have arisen during the transfer of the digital computer data using cheap equipment. It is also possible that the film was painstakingly created frame by frame, and no time-based corrector was used in the transfer of the film from the original to the copy, as discolorations also occur if the film was not professionally cut with European phase alternating line system equipment. Nevertheless, we did not want to withhold it. It shows how a crop circle could possibly be realized based on eyewitness reports.
I am convinced that the airborne component we know as UFO is a highly complex subject. It's an interdimensional object, and indeed it has a major part to play in these ground patterns. We've had three major events. The first involved multi-witnesses up here, something 18, 20 or more people, witnessing an orange light in the sky, which appeared to be approached by a helicopter or certainly an aircraft. That light then diminished in brilliance over a period of about 5 minutes, and in one quantum leap, it then appeared to the northwest of the site, moving directly overhead as a white light, which was then hit effectively by a beam of tungsten halogen light from our researchers down here, Dr. Stephen Greer, in fact, on the end of that light, and at the very moment that light shone on it, it simply disappeared.
What did it look like? All I could see was a pinpoint of light. That was all. It was just a dot of light. I couldn't see any shape or anything. I mean, there was a couple of red ones, mostly seemed to be white, and there was a blue one. No, there was a blue one.
And we see these two parallel lights come across the horizon, and they met together, and then they separated and descended into the field. And there they remained opposite each other in the field. And then some smaller lights came from those two lights into the centre and seemed to be turning around each other. Was still manoeuvring around, and there was a small amber light that was further out to the right-hand side, became intensified and bright, as if it was like the sun lighting up, a golden star. And at the same time, on the left-hand side, a smaller red sphere came out and started encircling around the smaller white lights in the middle, as if it was bringing them together. And then they seemed to all just go out, with the two big ones remaining opposite each other. And this lasted for about 1 hour.
I looked at the lights and thought, oh, they're just normal lights again. Then I realised one had moved, and then they flew in again. Then when I looked through binoculars, they were standing on top of each other, stacked. Then they separated and swung round to the west, over there, and went down on the field, separated and went down. When we looked, there was a light at each end of the field, a bright white light. So we watched this for a while and it started to glow. And then all of a sudden white light shot from all over, moving about all over the place. So we watched that for a few seconds, then realised it was a train, and the train passed. So when we looked again, the bright white lights were still in the field. So myself and Colin ran up the top and went to have a look. We found the point, looked down, and could see there was some sort of light action going on in the whole field. It seemed to take up the whole field. There was an orange glow to the left. Now, everything went fairly quiet and nothing happened. And we carried on watching. We watched this for a while. Now, where the orange glow was at the end of the right end of the field, we didn't think it was anything to do with what was going on, until the whole field erupted in bright lights. The orange glow turned into something nearly the brightness of the sun, and it stayed like that for a few seconds, and then all died down.
This is supported by the complexity and beauty and elaboration of the circles, which prove themselves to be beyond human ability. I'm convinced of this as a person who spent his life making and designing and fabricating and manufacturing things. I do not believe any human agency could be doing this.
From the precisely differentiated statements, it can be assumed that confusion with so-called military flyers from a nearby base at night can probably be ruled out. Here we are clearly dealing with a simple kind of fireworks, nothing like the manifestations witnessed in the cornfields. No orange balls, no blue lights, no light manifestations on the ground, nothing that could be seen as the division and remerging of spheres of energy.
The nearest we've got to some kind of explanation is that they have a probe-like aspect in the fields. They seem to be working with a determination to get some kind of information, to transmit some kind of information back somewhere. And it's been suggested that these are a manifestation of a very concentrated form of consciousness which can project itself to look at something and to bring information back. So that in many ways the luminosities can be seen in this aspect as a version of telepathy. Now, there have been other suggestions that the ball of light is a gateway and is the point at which different dimensions of reality actually make contact. So the balls of light, the spheres of light, the luminosities, are in fact the point at which our solid third-dimensional reality contacts fourth or fifth or sixth dimensional reality in and around the crop circles. But fundamentally, we're only just starting to look at the surface of this issue.
Already in 1991, not in England, but in nearby Germany, the phenomenon came to a climax of a different kind. Here in a crop field near Grausdorf, close to Hildesheim, a formation appeared which was comparable with the largest English formations. As in England, it appeared behind an ancient sacred site, a hill known as the Woldenberg, used for worship in Teutonic times. In this formation, 3 metal plates were found about 40 centimeters underground. They were made of gold, silver, and bronze, on which the pictogram is modeled in relief. It's dug up at Tiebergsfeld. The gold plate alone had a value of about $130,000. The plates were analyzed by the Federal German Bureau for Materials Research. The silver plate was found to be almost pure, with a 0.1% iron content, which is unheard of on Earth, as precious metals in their natural form are inevitably polluted by other materials. Using a plasma spectrometer, the tiny unavoidable contaminations can be shown to have a barcode like a genetic fingerprint. The experts at the research establishment who investigated the mystical plates insisted it was the most unusual casting they had ever seen. It is assumed that these were 3 extraordinary examples of so-called Germanic cult plates. But why is the formation represented on these plates? The story becomes more mysterious when we find the following words in the Germanic Leipzig edition of Ada from 1890. And in the grass, they will find once again the wondrous golden platter with which Wotan and all his race of Asen communicated in ancient times. There is also the work of scientists and thinkers such as the world-renowned astrophysicist Johannes Baron of Buttlar, who are leading us far beyond Einsteinian physics in a move towards a new consciousness of our existence. He finds a correlation with the work of biochemist Professor Rupert Sheldrake, who, in his book, The Creative Universe, developed his own theory of morphogenetic fields and their resonance, whose guiding power links all organisms beyond the material world, and determines evolution.
Morphische Resonanz würde bedeuten, dass schon mal eine Struktur, eine Form existierte, die auch emotional aufgeladen war. Das wäre bei Kultplatten zum Beispiel der Fall. Diese Struktur
Morphic resonance would mean that a structure, a form already existed which was also emotionally charged. For instance, this would be the case with the cult plates. This structure was already there in existence, and this information would be stored in a morphogenetic field and could then be reactivated, retrieved, so to speak, thousands of years later. And then these patterns would rematerialize. They would perhaps make themselves noticed in cornfields, rape fields, or meadows.
Sodass eigentlich hier diese Platten ein Indiz sein
In fact,
könnten, wenn sie
these plates
nicht
here could be
hergestellt worden
evidence.
sind in der heutigen
If they were
Zeit.
not
Das
produced
kann man
today,
nicht
this isn't all a bad joke,
sondern,
we are really
wenn wir
dealing
es
with
hier
an
mit einem
authentic
authentischen Phänomen
phenomenon.
zu tun haben,
Then it would be
dann,
evidence of morphic resonance.
für die morphische Resonanz. Gerade Kultplatten sind
Cult
ja
plates are emotionally charged. Entire rituals were held with them. The symbolism is archetypical. They had an incredible significance, and this significance remains in existence. And then you can just imagine if these plates, precisely in a Thingfeld here in Grasdorf, that this information, this form, rematerialized itself, so to speak. That is, made itself known as an aesthetically beautiful pictogram.
Sozusagen materialisierte, bemerkbar machte als ästhetisch schönes Piktogramm. Das UFO-Phänomen wird oft zu einfach
UFO phenomenon is
eingestuft.
often classified too simply. Even a physical phenomenon does not mean that it cannot also have an emotional significance, a psychological perspective. The UFO phenomenon has existed for millennia, and we know that UFOs, unidentified flying objects, often used to appear precisely at sacred sites. And one should not forget that sacred sites perhaps first became sacred precisely because something once descended from heaven here, beings which appeared like gods to the simple people of those times, and that the landing sites were often made into sacred places.
Für einfache Menschen der damaligen Zeit. Und dass diese Landeplätze dann oft zu Kultplätzen umfunktioniert worden sind.
Now one
Muss
must
sich
ask
fragen,
oneself,
wenn wir das
if we are to take the UFO phenomenon seriously, which we do, is it possible that the energetic phenomenon here are decisive for visitors from another world?
für Besucher aus einer anderen Welt. Die Erde, die ein Netzsystem von Kraftlinien
We find the Earth
aufweist,
has a network of energy channels, so-called ley lines or dragon paths, which also have junctions, energetic junctions, and it is quite possible that these junctions also have a special significance for these flying objects, also in the energetic sense, so that they appear here. This does not mean that the UFOs are the cause of these pictograms, but that they constantly appear here because these are places full of ancient energy which are significant for UFOnauts. That's where I see the most likely connection.
Da sehe ich eher den Zusammenhang. Ich halte die Piktogramme für ein irdisches Phänomen und nicht für ein
I
außerirdisches
believe that the
Phänomen.
pictograms are an earthly phenomenon, not an extraterrestrial one. And the fact that extraterrestrial objects appear precisely here can simply mean that these places have a special significance, and that the pictograms come into being today and have evolved because our consciousness has evolved too. In fact, we all have a stronger longing for an intact environment. A process of identification with nature is beginning again in many people. And this change in awareness could be the trigger for the evolution which these circles and pictograms undergo.
Diese Bewusstseinsveränderung der Aktivator für die Evolution, die solche Kreise, Piktogramme durchmachen.
We have come to accept the telepathic nature of the crop circle phenomenon and the synchronicity that the crop circle phenomenon brings with it to those close to it.
Crop circles seem to mean all things to all people, and some people look at them and they see them as signs of impending doom. Other people see them as signs of beautiful things to happen to this world and that they're going to open us up and make our lives a lot better. Other people see them in religious terms. They think they're signs from God or even from the devil, and there's that aspect to it as well. but there's even the thought that maybe these are symbols from our own human consciousness, which has somehow been projected into the fields. So that would be very interesting if that was the case, because it would mean that we are the circle makers and that there maybe is no outside force creating them. It's just an interesting possibility that as our minds expand and as we evolve, maybe that our subconscious minds have learned to project these symbols onto the fields, and so we could be the circle makers ourselves.
The optimism of this community that is studying the crop circles, who seem to be saying, unknown, we love it. The unexplained, fantastic. Massive changes in society, we are delighted with it. And there is a fantastic sense of optimism, impatience, and anxiety to see what's going to come next.
I think if there is a whole idea behind this, I think that's the idea, is just simply to open people up, to make people ask questions by giving them these tantalising clues as to the fact that they might look like something or they might mean something. And from these clues, people ask their own questions about what it's about. And when you ask questions, you then open up to asking questions about yourself, about the nature of the universe, and just what life in general is all about. So if there's no other meaning beside that, that's certainly what has happened.
You can't be absolutely sure about a crop circle. Nothing is absolute.
These symbols are not meant to be taken just on one level. They are multicultural. They have many different meanings to many different people. Are the corn circles also a higher expression of a collective consciousness? Are they memorials arising from our own subconscious? Symbols which have a supposed meaning like the spirals in the Irish burial site at Newgrange? Are they a representation of the winding journey into the realms of the dead? Are they a mirror of our souls, which, as the Hopi Indians believe, are supposed to make us aware of our roots? Do the signs point and say, Mother Earth is weeping? Or are they even there as symbols from civilizations of other worlds, which want to point out our lamentable state of environmental destruction and overpopulation at the coming of the new millennium by inscribing the patterns in corn, a fundamental source of our nutrition? Is this a representation of DNA, the seat of our genetic code, of all information on the genetic heritage of humanity, the animal and plant kingdoms? Is it a further call to reflect upon how everything is so wonderfully genetically programmed? Are we not to underestimate today's possibilities of major genetic manipulation? Are the creators of these signs choosing to address their message not to the governments of this world, but to humanity itself? Or are Doug and Dave and their imitators simply tools of a higher consciousness that they themselves claim not to know, but which drove them to play their role in the phenomenon? No one today can give the only true answer to these questions. It remains to be seen whether the human race is capable of summoning the will to recognize the meaning of these timeless symbols.